He fervently believes he should be out. Looking at his case, I look and I think maybe this man is in the wrong institution. If he's anywhere, he certainly has got his issues. He certainly has his problems. Would you care to highlight why he's behind bars and why so long?
Well, Charlie was originally imprisoned way back in 1974 for armed robbery. And what we've seen since then is a series of offences, the vast majority of which have occurred behind prison bars. They've occurred in prison. And if you were to speak to Charlie today, which unfortunately, of course, you can't, he would be the first to admit that he's fought the system. But the system has fought him back and it continues to do so.
It's fascinating. I mean, there's been another high-profile discussion about parole this week. The case of Joanna Brown. She was violently murdered by her own husband with a claw hammer. And yet they're talking about him possibly being released soon. And yet here we have somebody, as you say, who just committed an armed robbery, still struggling to get released after all these years. I suppose it begs the question of whether or not prison is the right place, as Eamon says, but actually can make people worse almost. He's committed more crimes. Solitary confinement for huge periods of that. I mean,
so he's committed more crimes in prison than he has out of prison. And we should say, I think, John, people think he's murdered someone or he's raped someone or he's done something. I mean, he has done a heinous thing, running around with a shotgun or whatever, but maybe not as bad as people believe or led to believe.
Well, that is why this case is so unique, Eamon. If you were to approach people on the street and to talk about Charlie, you yourself introduced him as being Britain's most notorious prisoner, and that is frequently how he's introduced in the news, in newspapers and the various broadcasts that we've seen about him. But if you really strip it all down and look at this case, he hasn't been convicted of murder. He's never raped anyone. He's never offended against children. And it begs the question, is he really Britain's most notorious prisoner when we consider that within our system we have the killers of Lee Rigby, Levi Belfield, and Ian Huntley, to name but a few? Can we really say that someone convicted of Charlie's crimes is in fact the most notorious prisoner? But to come to your point as to whether the environment he finds himself in has contributed to his history, unquestionably it has. He is a product of the system in which he finds himself. And to put things in some perspective, he's imprisoned in what we call a close supervision centre. This is, in effect, a prison within a prison. He spends 23 hours of the day in his cell. He gets an hour of recreation. And that recreation will be, again, on his own in a small exercise yard. It's hard to imagine what 40 to 50 years of that sort of detention will do to a man.
So, John, I get that, and you paint the picture very, very well. If you were sitting on that parole board today, what way would you vote?
It's difficult for me to comment, Eamon. I'm not instructed currently, but I have followed the case, as you would imagine I have. There's been no violence since 2018. The last criminal charge was back in 2014. And he is a man who's now, he's either approaching 70 or he's 70. I'm not entirely sure on that. He is now, and I will say this, it's a bold statement, I think he is a political prisoner because he's held in these extremely secure and almost alien conditions that I've described to you just now. He's not being given any opportunity to meaningfully show to anybody, and that's particularly the parole board, that he can be trusted or he can be live a more pro-social life in the community or even in less secure prison conditions. So if I was sitting on the parole board today, I certainly would be hoping, given that we haven't seen any demonstrated violence for quite a number of years, as I've explained, I would be hoping that progress can be made. And if that can't be for release into the community, which would be unquestionably would be a huge step from the conditions he finds himself in currently, I would certainly be hoping that that progress could be made through the system, perhaps to open conditions, which is something your listeners and yourselves may have heard of, where prisoners are tested in an environment which is more similar to what we see in the community.